The big problem that could slow down the whole self-driving car race is that they can't drive in bad weather.
The world that they're seeing, which they often measure in terms of how much things reflect, look a lot different when they're wet and covered with snow.
From American Public Media, this is Marketplace Tech. I'm Molly Wood. It has been a tough couple of weeks on America's roads.
This is what can happen to any driver in snowy conditions. Around 10 this morning...
It turns out that what happens to human drivers in bad weather can also happen to self-driving cars. In just the last 2 years or so, car makers have started expanding the range of places where they're testing their vehicles to try to make driverless cars better at negotiating bad weather. Chris Gerdes is a professor of mechanical engineering and director of the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford. I asked him just how big the weather issue is.
It is a real problem, and the way to think about weather is it just makes all of the tasks of automated driving a little bit more challenging. So it makes it a little bit harder to see. Your sensors work a little less well. It certainly means that the vehicle has less ability to move. The friction between the tire and the road is reduced, so it's more likely that dramatic maneuvers could cause the vehicle to go into a spin. So it makes all of the problems a little bit harder and forces you to be a little bit more conservative in all of these ways.
And then how significant does this start to become when we're in this, when the weather's changing a lot? Is the technology development and the testing able to keep up with even the climate change that we're starting to see?
Well, you certainly see a lot more testing of automated vehicles in situations where there are weather extremes. So this is definitely increasing. It wasn't necessarily where people started with the testing, but nowadays you see a lot of the manufacturers specifically seeking out bad weather so they can get more data on how the cars behave.
Do you think it also forces sort of conservative approach to development or to the overall timeline of self-driving cars?
Well, I think there's a lot of uses for self-driving cars that you can limit, in fact, to good weather conditions. And so the way that the government and the way that manufacturers have been looking at these vehicles is really describe the conditions under which the car can operate and describe the way that you're making sure that the car isn't operating in other conditions. So cars might operate originally on a sunny day, then they're fine. If it's drizzling a little bit, then they start to be able to handle larger amounts of rain, and then eventually the operational design domain may even allow us to go out in the middle of a blizzard.
I mean, this is a fast-moving industry. When you look at this landscape and you say there are weather concerns, there are, you're still trying to test the outer limits of the car's physical performance, there are these sort of ethical and programming questions. Do you feel like this industry is it a little ahead of its skis?
Well, I think that things are moving very quickly. But I do think that the concept that most people are thinking about of, I don't necessarily have to solve every problem before I get the vehicles out there, before I test them, before I see how people will interact with them. I can do that in a safe way, in a limited sense, and then begin to just expand their capabilities.
So it's sort of like teenagers. Like we let them drive even though we know it's not a good idea, knowing that they will eventually get better.
That's a real point when we talk about, well, how good of a driver do we need the automated vehicle to be? We have some absolutely outstanding human drivers out on the road, and those who are, perhaps future outstanding drivers but haven't yet achieved that level.
Chris Gerdes is director of the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford. And, of course, you should expect to hear a lot about autonomous cars this week. The big technology trade show CES is happening in Las Vegas. Ford's CEO keynotes today. Toyota, NVIDIA, Uber, and Volkswagen have all already made self-driving car tech announcements at the show. Toyota, in fact, showed off a concept autonomous vehicle in partnership with Pizza Hut. This is true. The e-Pallet will go into testing as soon as 2020. It could eventually be used to deliver Pizza Hut pizzas and maybe even cook them en route. Of course, we all know that when you most want to order a pizza is when it's raining or snowing. So hopefully they're working on that too. I'm Molly Wood, and that's Marketplace Tech. This is APM.